My sister Olivia had once dismissed me with a chilling finality. Her words, sharp enough to make the crystal of her champagne flute, seemed to tremble in sympathy. "He's nothing," she declared, a pronouncement that echoed far louder than its actual volume. The bitter irony, a taste I had grown far too accustomed to over the years, was that Noah Evans, the man she was now married to, had actually cited my work on corporate ethics in one of his published academic papers. He'd referenced my analysis of the Henry Sterling Corp. case, a period of my life that had cost me dearly. My name is Alex Pierce, and I am 48 years old. I still keep the old fountain pen Professor Maxwell gifted me years ago. It rests in my coat pocket, a solid, comforting weight, a tangible link to a time when upholding my principles felt less like an isolating act and more like a shared conviction. Have you ever experienced that peculiar agony of being systematically erased by your own flesh and blood, only to find an unexpected sliver of validation from a near stranger? It started, as these things often did, with a feeling of being on the outside looking in. I first learned about the casual family get-together Olivia and Noah were hosting from a brightly filtered post on Olivia's social media feed. Pictures of her, Noah, and his parents, all smiles and relaxed poses, flashed across my screen. The caption spoke of a wonderful evening planned to bring the families closer. My own invitation, an email, arrived a day later, an afterthought, a belated courtesy. There was no "Dear Alex," no "Hope you can make it, brother." Just a curtly worded message with the time and place, the Chesapeake Bay Club. And tucked at the bottom of Olivia's email, like a venomous postscript, was a personal message from my mother, Catherine. Her words, though digital, carried the familiar chill of her disapproval. "Alex, you don't really need to attend, but if you do, please ensure Noah's parents aren't made uncomfortable by any discussions of the past." Her meaning was painfully clear. Don't cause a scene. Don't remind anyone of the Sterling Corp. affair. Don't be yourself. I reread her message, then Olivia's carefully impersonal invitation, a familiar ache settling in my chest. I stared at the screen for a long while, the words blurring slightly. My office, once a bustling hub when I was a corporate lawyer, now held a profound quiet. It wasn't the quiet of peace, but the heavy silence of things unsaid, of relationships fractured. It was a silence I had learned to inhabit, if not embrace. My mother's tone hadn't softened in a decade. Not since the aftermath of the Sterling Corp. whistleblowing when I brought evidence of significant upper management fraud to light. I remembered standing on the porch of our Annapolis home, the one I grew up in, as she delivered her verdict on my actions. "We don't air our family's troubles in public, Alex," she had stated, her voice devoid of any warmth, any understanding. She hadn't shouted. Her disapproval was always a cold, hard thing. "You've brought nothing but embarrassment to this family by stirring up such trouble." Then she had turned and deliberately shut the front door, the click of the latch echoing the closing of a chapter in my life. "No, I understand why you did it. No, I'm sorry this is so hard for you." Just those clipped sentences and the finality of that closing door. That was, in essence, the last truly honest conversation I'd had with my mother. Now, years later, that memory felt as solid and unyielding as the old leather armchair in my study. My fingers idly brushed over a stack of unopened mail on my desk, mostly bills, impersonal flyers, the usual paper-thin pronouncements of a life lived largely alone. But beneath them, I kept one particular envelope, its paper slightly yellowed with age. The address was penned in the confident, familiar script of Professor Maxwell, my former mentor at Georgetown Law, a man who had passed away 2 springs prior. He wasn't family by blood, no. But if you measured a father's worth by the depth of his wisdom and the steadfastness of his support, Professor Maxwell would have outshone my own father in any conceivable contest. I carefully unfolded his last letter to me, though I knew its contents by heart. He'd written it after I declined an invitation to speak at a corporate ethics conference, a conference where my Sterling Corp. work was to be a key topic, Alex, he had written, true strength isn't about constant confrontation. It's about discerning when silence is necessary and when a voice, however quiet, must be raised for what is right. Some legacies are built in those quiet moments of conviction. I hadn't replied to him then. How could I? What could I possibly have said? Forgive me, Professor, but I seem to be the kind of man whose conviction, when voiced, cost him his family. My gaze drifted to a small, unassuming box on the corner of my desk. I reached for it with a certain reverence, the way one handles a relic of a life partly foregone. Inside, nestled on dark velvet, lay the old fountain pen he had given me upon my graduation from Georgetown Law, inscribed with a quote from John Rawls. It was the same pen I had used to take notes during the most challenging ethical dilemmas of my career. The same pen I hadn't much used since the fallout from the Sterling Corp case, since my family made it clear that my sense of honor and their desire for an untroubled existence could not coexist. I placed the pen gently on my desk. Then, taking a breath that felt heavy with the weight of years, I opened my laptop. Instead of searching for legal precedents, I typed Noah Evans, Sociology, Publications into the search bar. His university profile appeared, along with a list of his academic articles. One title, focused on social responsibility in modern institutions, caught my attention. I clicked on the link, my heart rate quickening almost imperceptibly. The headline was innocuous: Ethical Frameworks in Institutional Behavior. I scrolled through the dense academic prose, my eyes scanning for familiar concepts: corporate governance, stakeholder theory, ethical drift. And then, there it was, a passage discussing the complexities of internal whistleblowing. Mid-article, a direct reference: the ethical dilemmas faced by insiders, such as in the widely discussed in Re Sterling Corp. 2015 case, highlight the societal value of individual courage. Alex Pierce's actions in that instance, though professionally costly, provided a crucial data point for. The citation led to a footnote referencing an article I had published years ago in the Georgetown Law Journal, analyzing the ethical failures within Sterling Corp. I blinked, not from surprise, but because seeing my name, my work, discussed with such detached academic objectivity felt strangely validating. The words on the screen didn't feel entirely like mine anymore. They felt like an echo from a past I had carefully, painfully compartmentalized, along with every professional commendation, every news clipping about the Sterling case, every well-meaning letter from colleagues that couldn't quite fill the void left by a family that preferred I remain an unmentionable footnote. I closed the browser tab, a whirlwind of emotions stirring within me. But a quiet resolve had already taken root. I was going to that dinner. The Chesapeake Bay Club exuded an aura of old money and carefully curated exclusivity. As I stepped into the private dining room reserved for the Pierce Evans family gathering, the atmosphere felt thick with unspoken tensions. Long tables were adorned with tasteful floral arrangements, and the soft clinking of silverware provided a delicate counterpoint to the strained smiles. There was a place card at every setting, meticulously calligraphed. Every setting, that is, except for one at the far end of the table, clearly the least desirable spot. It held only a crisply folded napkin, a silent, cream-colored vacancy where a name should have been. It was clearly my designated seat, a placeholder for the guest they half hoped would materialize. I ran a thumb over the smooth, anonymous cardstock before taking my seat. The chair felt stiff, unwelcoming, as if it, too, wished I were elsewhere. The room was abuzz with polite, surface-level chatter, primarily between Noah's parents and Olivia, with my mother occasionally interjecting with a carefully chosen anecdote. I was an island in their sea of conviviality. String lights twinkled prettily overhead, a futile attempt to inject warmth into the decidedly cool atmosphere. The hors d'oeuvres delicate shrimp cocktails, artfully arranged deviled eggs circulated, but the platters seemed to bypass me, as if an invisible barrier surrounded my end of the table. A server, a young man with kind eyes, did approach with a tray of champagne flutes. I offered a small, almost imperceptible shake of my head. He nodded once, a flicker of understanding in his gaze, and moved on. Down the table, a cousin I vaguely remembered from Olivia's college graduation years ago shot a curious glance in my direction. Her lips parted as if to speak, perhaps a question forming, but then she visibly thought better of it and turned back to her conversation. I straightened my tie, a conservative navy silk, paired with a crisp white shirt. My attire was deliberately unremarkable, polished enough to not draw undue attention, the uniform of someone who might be a distant relative, easily overlooked, easily forgotten. Near the head of the table, Olivia was in her element. She moved with an effortless grace, a practiced hostess, her laughter light, her hand resting briefly on an arm here, a shoulder there. She was the picture of southern charm, a delicate blend of sweetness and an underlying resilience I knew all too well. She laughed, she nodded, she engaged. But her gaze never once met mine. It was a familiar performance, one I had witnessed countless times. I glanced down at my place setting again, the gleaming fork, the polished knife, the starkly blank card. The menu, printed in elegant script, announced a celebratory dinner for Olivia and Noah. My name, Alex Pierce, was conspicuously absent from the narrative of the evening. This feeling of erasure, of being deliberately omitted, was not new to me. I recalled a large family photograph from Olivia's graduation day at Georgetown. It used to hang in the hallway of my parents' Annapolis home before my visits became infrequent. A sprawling group shot on the university lawns. Mom, Dad, Olivia radiant in her cap and gown, various aunts, uncles, and cousins. I had been there, standing on the periphery of the group, one hand resting proudly on Olivia's shoulder, the other tucked casually into my pocket. But when that same photograph later appeared on Olivia's social media, my face, and indeed my entire presence, had been skillfully cropped out. Only my disembodied hand on her shoulder remained, a ghostly, anonymous touch. When I gingerly asked her about it, feigning casual curiosity, Olivia had waved it away with a breezy, "Oh, that was just for the aesthetics, Alex. You know how Instagram formatting can be." I had nodded then, accepting the flimsy excuse, just as I was nodding inwardly now at the blank name card. Across the table, I overheard a hushed whisper from one of Noah's relatives. "Who is that gentleman at the end?" Another voice, equally soft, replied, "He looks somewhat familiar. Is he a friend of Noah's family, perhaps?" Suddenly, a plate was placed gently before me. It held a small serving of deviled eggs and 2 shrimp, items I hadn't requested. The young server, the one with the kind eyes, lingered for a fraction of a second, his nervousness palpable. "Mr. Pierce," he murmured, then quickly corrected himself. "I mean, sir. My apologies." I met his gaze, offering a small, reassuring smile. "No problem at all." He scurried away, visibly flustered. I picked up my fork and nudged one of the deviled eggs, turning it slowly on the plate before setting the fork down again. My appetite had vanished, if it had ever truly been present. Then I noticed Noah. He was standing near the fireplace, conversing with one of his colleagues, but his eyes were fixed on me. He didn't avert his gaze when he saw me looking. Instead, he leaned in, said something brief and deliberate to the person beside him. He then gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod in my direction before his gaze returned to mine, holding it for a moment. I held his gaze for a breath, a silent acknowledgement passing between us, then looked down at my plate. The blank card still stared up at me, but for the first time that evening, I didn't feel entirely invisible. A little later, as coffee was being served, Noah steered the conversation. "Actually, Alex," he began, his voice carrying easily across the table, "I've been meaning to tell you. I've been using your Georgetown Law Journal article on the Sterling Corporation case in my graduate seminar on applied ethics." A hush fell over the table. All eyes turned to me. I felt a momentary warmth, a flicker of the pride I once took in my work. It provoked some excellent discussions among the students about corporate responsibility. Noah continued, a genuine warmth in his tone. Before I could respond, before anyone could, my mother's voice cut through the air, as sharp and cold as a shard of ice. Noah, dear, Catherine said, her smile tight and artificial. That's all in the distant past. I'm sure Alex doesn't want to dwell on old business matters. Let's talk about something more pleasant, shall we? The warmth I'd felt moments before vanished, extinguished by her words. The implication was clear. My past, my work, my convictions, they were old business, unpleasant, best left buried. Noah looked momentarily taken aback, a flash of surprise in his eyes, but he recovered quickly, gracefully redirecting the conversation. Olivia, I noticed, looked down at her lap, her expression unreadable. Was that a flicker of discomfort, or perhaps even shame, in her averted gaze? I couldn't be sure. I picked up my water glass, the silence at my end of the table now heavier than ever. The brief moment of connection Noah had offered had been deftly, cruelly severed. My past was indeed glorious in its own way, a testament to standing for something. But here, in the suffocating presence of my family, it was a source of shame, a mark of my otherness. The loneliness felt acute, a familiar companion. The wedding reception was held at the Chesapeake Bay Club, a grand affair. Hundreds of guests mingled, champagne flowed, and a string quartet played softly in the background. As the formal speeches began, I found my seat, once again at a table somewhat removed from the main family contingent, though this time, a simple Alex Pierce was printed on the card. A minor victory, perhaps. When Noah stood to give his groom's speech, a hush fell over the grand ballroom. He spoke eloquently of his love for Olivia, of their shared hopes for the future. Then his tone shifted, became more serious. Many of you know I teach sociology, and I often discuss the importance of individual integrity within larger systems. Noah began, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling quite deliberately on me. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Years ago, he continued, his voice clear and resonant, I came across the details of a significant corporate ethics case, the Henry Sterling Corporation matter. It involved a man who, at great personal and professional risk, chose to expose serious wrongdoing from within. He stood up for what was right, even when it was incredibly difficult, even when it meant facing immense pressure and recrimination. The air in the ballroom grew still. I could feel dozens of eyes turning towards me, some curious, some confused. My mother, Catherine, seated at the main bridal table, visibly stiffened. Her lips thinned into a disapproving line, her knuckles white as she gripped her water glass. That man's courage, Noah declared, his voice ringing with conviction. His unwavering commitment to ethical principles in the face of overwhelming opposition has been an inspiration to me, both professionally and personally. It serves as a powerful reminder that true integrity often requires us to make uncomfortable choices, to speak truth to power, even when it's lonely. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. That man is my brother-in-law, Alex Pierce. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Catherine's face was a mask of polite fury. But Olivia's reaction was more complex. Her eyes, when they met mine across the crowded room, were wide, filled with a mixture of emotions. I couldn't quite decipher shock, yes, but also a dawning understanding, and perhaps, just perhaps, a flicker of pride. She looked agitated, her breath catching slightly, but she didn't look away. The applause, when it came, was scattered at first, then grew into a warm, sustained wave. I inclined my head slightly in Noah's direction, a silent acknowledgement of his profound and unexpected gesture. Later, as the music swelled and guests began to move towards the dance floor, Olivia approached me. She looked uncertain, her usual composure slightly frayed. In her hand, she held a simple, unmarked envelope. Alex, she began. her voice softer than I'd heard it in years. Noah's speech. It made me think. She hesitated, then pressed the envelope into my hand. "This was Dad's," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I found it in his study when we were clearing things out. I think. I think he would have wanted you to have it." Before I could respond, she squeezed my hand briefly, a fleeting, almost tentative touch, and then turned and melted back into the crowd. I stood there for a moment, the envelope feeling unexpectedly heavy in my hand. What could it be? Back in the quiet of my hotel room later that night, far from the receding sounds of the celebration, I finally opened the envelope Olivia had given me. It didn't contain a photograph, as I might have half expected, or a sentimental card. Inside, carefully preserved, was a faded, typewritten document. A copy of an internal ethics proposal I had authored during my time at Sterling Corporation. It was a detailed plan for strengthening the company's compliance programs and fostering a more ethical corporate culture, the very document that had, in part, led to my eventual whistleblowing when its recommendations were systematically ignored and suppressed by senior management. I stared at it, a wave of emotion washing over me. My father, a man of few words and even fewer overt displays of approval, had kept this. He had saved this paper, a testament to my convictions, a silent acknowledgement of the principles I had fought for. He had never spoken of it, never given any indication that he understood, let alone sympathized with, the path I had chosen. And yet, here was the proof, tangible and undeniable, that he had, in his own quiet way, perhaps seen the value in what I had done. Olivia's words echoed in my mind. "I think he would have wanted you to have it." A profound sense of peace, a feeling I hadn't realized I'd been missing so acutely, began to settle over me. It wasn't absolution, not exactly, but it was a connection, a bridge across the chasm of years and misunderstanding. My father had seen me, truly seen me, in a way my mother, perhaps, never could. And through Olivia, he had, in a sense, reached out. This quiet act of preservation, this secret acknowledgement, felt more significant than any public accolade. It was a private mending, a balm to an old, deep wound. The online storm broke a few days after the wedding. Noah's speech, or rather, a maliciously distorted version of it, began circulating on various online forums and gossip sites. Anonymous posts, likely fueled by someone at the wedding who hadn't appreciated Noah's candor, painted me as a disgraced lawyer and family troublemaker who had hijacked his sister's wedding for self-promotion. Old, disproven allegations related to the Sterling Corp. Fallout were rehashed, twisted to fit this new, damaging narrative. The subject lines in my email inbox screamed accusations: Alex Pierce, ethics guru or master manipulator. Even a few poorly made memes depicting me in a negative light surfaced on a popular online forum. It was a classic smear campaign, ugly, baseless, but designed for maximum clicks and reputational damage. Rain lashed against the windows of my Annapolis home office, a fitting soundtrack to the turmoil brewing online. The city outside was shrouded in a gray mist, making everything look both cleansed and vaguely ominous. Inside, however, my office remained a sanctuary of calm. The familiar scent of old books and brewing coffee, the steadfast presence of my leather armchair. My phone buzzed incessantly with news alerts, each one a fresh stab of digital venom. I leaned back, hands clasped behind my head, and surveyed the digital battlefield. This wasn't random. It was a calculated attack. I recalled something I'd once told a young associate who was hesitant to report unethical practices she'd witnessed. When your truth threatens someone else's carefully constructed illusion, they will invariably fight back with fictions. And here we were, living proof. My phone lit up with an incoming call. Sarah Chen. My PR strategist, Sarah, was more than just an advisor. She was a force of nature, the person you called when your reputation was engulfed in flames. "Good morning, Alex," I said, my voice calm. "You've seen the online garbage, I take it," she replied. her tone brisk. All business. No niceties. Straight to the point. Indeed, I have. I confirmed. I've already identified the main sources and the most damaging articles, Sarah said. The narrative they're pushing is disgraced troublemaker. How do you want to play this? Aggressive takedown or let it die a natural death? I could hear the underlying current of protective indignation in her voice, a loyalty I deeply valued. We respond, Sarah, I said firmly. Not with outrage, not with anger. We respond with facts. There was a brief pause on her end. That's why I stick with you, Alex. All right, facts it is. Send me your statement. By mid-morning, I had drafted a concise, one-page response. No emotional language, no defensive posturing. Just a clear, factual account of the Sterling Corp. Internal whistleblowing, including excerpts from the third-party committee's report that ultimately vindicated my actions and led to positive changes within the company. I also included a copy of the award I'd received from the Corporate Ethics Initiative for my contributions to the field. At the bottom, I added a simple, unattributed quote. The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose. It will defend itself. I didn't post it on my personal social media. Sarah, with her usual strategic acumen, uploaded it to my professional blog and my LinkedIn profile, accompanying it with a brief, neutral statement. No drama, just a quiet dissemination of truth. By the next day, the tide began to turn. The comments sections beneath the defamatory articles started to fill with supportive messages. Alex Pierce consulted for my company. His insights on ethical leadership were invaluable. I worked with Alex during the Sterling Corp crisis. He was a man of immense integrity under incredible pressure. Don't let anonymous trolls assassinate the character of a good man. These weren't bot-generated comments or orchestrated spin. They were genuine testimonials from former colleagues, clients I'd advised through my consulting firm, even individuals I'd mentored years ago. They were voices of reason emerging from the digital shadows, a testament to a reputation built on years of quiet, consistent ethical conduct. One comment from a junior executive at a company I'd helped navigate a difficult compliance issue particularly resonated. She wrote, Alex Pierce taught us that doing the right thing isn't always the easiest path, but it's the only one that leads to lasting trust. He stood by us, and we stand by him. That one made me pause, a sense of quiet gratitude washing over me. A well-meaning former colleague from my old law firm called, his voice laced with awkward concern. Alex, I saw that nonsense online. Do you want me to draft a letter to the editor for one of the legal journals? Set the record straight? I appreciated his loyalty. Thank you, Mark, but I believe it's being handled. He sounded surprised by my composure. All right, Alex, if you're sure. I suppose it's difficult for some to comprehend a quiet defense when they're accustomed to aggressive confrontation. The digital storm gradually subsided. The city outside my window hummed its usual rhythm. Then my phone vibrated with an incoming text message. An unknown number. One terse line. You've made your point, Alex. Now, for everyone's sake, just stay away. It was unsigned, but I had a strong suspicion it was from my mother. I stared at the message, a familiar weariness settling upon me. I didn't flinch. I didn't reply. I simply placed the phone face down on my desk, leaned back in my chair, and let the silence of my office, a silence now tinged with a quiet sense of vindication, envelop me. A few weeks later, I stood at the podium in the main auditorium of Georgetown University Law Center, my alma mater. The room was filled to capacity, with an overflow crowd watching on screens in an adjacent hall. The banner behind me read, Georgetown Law Ethics Seminar Series, Keynote Address by Alex Pierce. Sarah had, of course, taken a photo of it, but with a knowing smile, hadn't posted it anywhere. Some victories were best savored privately. As I stood in the green room beforehand, adjusting my tie, a nervous habit that had persisted through years of high-stakes presentations, I glanced at the framed photographs of past keynote speakers adorning the walls. Distinguished judges, renowned activists, influential authors, individuals whose words and actions had left an indelible mark. I recognized several of them. I had studied the work of a few. Professor Maxwell's photograph wasn't among them, but I could almost hear his wise, encouraging voice. Remember, Alex, your most significant record isn't etched on paper or announced in headlines. It's written in the integrity of who you become, in the choices you make when no one is watching. The room quieted as I approached the podium. No one asked about the recent online smear campaign. No one mentioned my family. Instead, I spoke to them about something I believed deeply, a truth forged in the crucible of my own experiences. The law, at its best, strives to remember what individuals and institutions sometimes try to forget, to erase, I began. There will be times when you witness ethical lapses, when expediency is favored over principle, when silence seems like the safest, easiest option. But what truly matters, what endures beyond fleeting successes or failures, is not your title, your pedigree, or your influence. It is whether you show up authentically and courageously. It's whether you choose to do what is right, especially when it is difficult, especially when no one is compelling you to. I let a moment of silence settle, not for dramatic effect, but to allow the weight of the words to sink in. A few people in the audience nodded slowly. I saw a young woman in the front row discreetly wipe her eyes. My gaze scanned the crowd, not searching for anyone in particular, just connecting with the sea of faces. And then I saw her, a young woman seated near the back of the auditorium. She had intelligent, earnest eyes and a certain determined set to her jaw. A name badge clipped to her jacket identified her as Jessica Miller, Corporate Counsel. After the Q&A session concluded and the applause subsided, Ms. Miller approached me, a slight hesitation in her step. "Mr. Pierce," she began, her voice quiet but firm. "Your talk was incredibly inspiring. I work in-house at a large corporation, and, well, sometimes it's challenging to know how to uphold ethical principles when there's pressure to do otherwise." She looked at me then, a direct, searching gaze. "How do you find the strength to keep raising your voice, to keep pushing for what's right, even within a complex organization?" I looked at her, truly looked, and saw not just a young lawyer asking for advice, but a kindred spirit, someone with the courage to grapple with difficult questions. I saw the same spark of conviction I hoped Professor Maxwell had once seen in me. I reached into my inner coat pocket and retrieved the old fountain pen, the one Professor Maxwell had given me, its dark resin worn smooth by years of use. The pen was engraved with a quote from the philosopher John Rawls: "Justice is the first virtue of social institutions." I held it out to her. "This pen was a gift from my mentor," I said. "It has been a constant reminder to me of the principles we've discussed today. It was a lodestar for me. Perhaps you can find your own." Ms. Miller looked down at the pen, then back at me, her eyes shining with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. She accepted it with a reverent nod, too moved to speak immediately. "Thank you, Mr. Pierce," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. "I will treasure this, and I will try to live up to its message." The applause that followed her words was softer this time, more personal, a wave of quiet affirmation that filled the room. I didn't linger for the networking reception or the inevitable book deal pitches. I slipped out of the auditorium and into the crisp afternoon air of the Georgetown campus. No grand parade, no screaming headlines, just the steady, rhythmic tap of my shoes on the familiar brick pathways and the lingering warmth of that encounter. A man remembered not for the noise he made, but for the quiet, consistent presence of his convictions. And somehow that felt more than enough. Later that evening, as I sat in my study in Annapolis, a new email pinged in my inbox. It was from Olivia. The message was short, almost tentative. "Alex," it read, "the kids have been asking about you. They found some of your old papers from Georgetown Law in Dad's study, the ones about corporate ethics. They're actually really interested. Would you consider coming over for dinner next weekend? Just us." A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, not a dramatic resolution of all past hurts. But it was a beginning. A small, fragile olive branch extended across a divide that had once seemed insurmountable. Perhaps silence didn't always mean surrender. And perhaps, just perhaps, family, in its own imperfect way, could eventually choose a path towards understanding. And that, I realized, was more than enough. It was everything.